All right, welcome back. This is Wake Up Sierra Leone here on AYV television and radio. We're broadcasting from the top of Tower Hill at the heart of Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown.
Coming up in the program this morning, the US Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Brian David Hunt, will provide a comprehensive explanation of the new US restriction to Sierra Leone by President Donald Trump. US support to Sierra Leone, among other developments which we shall be discussing this morning.
And we shall also be speaking to the country's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Timothy Musakaba, on Sierra Leone's diplomatic relationship and the new US entry restrictions on Sierra Leone by President Donald Trump, among other things.
Facebook comment section is there. It's always AYV News. Go there and get your voice heard.
All right, welcome back. This is Wake Up Sierra Leone here on AYV television and radio. We're broadcasting from the top of Tower Hill at the heart of Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown.
Coming up in the program this morning, the US Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Brian David Hunt, will provide a comprehensive explanation of the new US restriction to Sierra Leone by President Donald Trump. US support to Sierra Leone, among other developments which we shall be discussing this morning.
And we shall also be speaking to the country's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Timothy Musakaba, on Sierra Leone's diplomatic relationship and the new US entry restrictions on Sierra Leone by President Donald Trump, among other things.
Facebook comment section is there. It's always AYV News. Go there and get your voice heard. Keep in the form of a comment, a question, or just a general suggestion.
All right, welcome back. This is Wake Up Sierra Leone here on AYV television and radio. We're broadcasting from the top of Tower Hill at the heart of Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown.
Coming up in the program this morning, the US Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Brian David Hunt, will provide a comprehensive explanation of the new US restriction to Sierra Leone by President Donald Trump. US support to Sierra Leone, among other developments which we shall be discussing this morning.
And we shall also be speaking to the country's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Timothy Musakaba, on Sierra Leone's diplomatic relationship and the new US entry restrictions on Sierra Leone by President Donald Trump, among other things.
Facebook comment section is there. It's always AYV News. Go there and get your voice heard. Keep in the form of a comment, a question, or just a general suggestion on the topic we're discussing this morning.
In our first conversation, this first segment now, following the recent announcement made by President Donald Trump on the night of June 4th, 2025, new visa restrictions have been imposed on nationals from Sierra Leone, effectively banning 2026 diversity visa, that's the DV lottery, winners from entering the United States, among others. The proclamation has raised concerns among many ordinary Sierra Leonean citizens who had hopes of traveling to the United States. This morning, to talk more about this, U.S. support to Sierra Leone, MCC Compact, among other things, we have the United States Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Brian David Hunt, who will provide a comprehensive explanation of the new entry restrictions, among other developments. Good morning, Ambassador. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Always a pleasure to be here.
It's been quite a journey for the world and the U.S. since the inauguration of President Donald Trump. Specifically, Sierra Leone has had its own here and there. There are people who are super excited about traveling to the U.S. Let's start Let's start with understanding these added restrictions.
Visitor and student visas, and decided to impose restrictions upon those categories as well as upon a wide number of categories on the immigrant visa side.
But you wonder, why is this affecting those who played the DV lottery? So these are people who played, clearly stating their intention, wanting to relocate to the US. Through the US government's process, they got selected. So these are people who have already expressed intentions of relocating to the US. Why are they now affected?
Well, because the president decided to restrict immigrant visa travel to the United States other than in very specific categories, primarily those who qualify as immediate relatives of United States citizens or permanent residents. So those who have relationships in the United States, family reunification in the United States, which is something that we prioritize, will continue to be able to travel as immigrants to the United States. Other categories, because the president chose to restrict them, are not going to be able to do so. He's been fairly clear that his primary motivation here is to prevent illegal migration to the United States and to ensure that those coming to the United States are appropriately vetted. At this time, he did not feel that we could appropriately vet all immigrants who wanted to come to the United States, so he's imposed restrictions and prioritized those who have family in the United States over those who do not.
The feedback to this, for some people, they contextualize this to look like the righteous suffering for the wicked. Couldn't there have been other measures to, for instance, those that the US government had issued a data saying they overstay their visas? And the US is one of the countries in the world that, is really good with its data collection and management. You have intelligence. You should be able to internally there in the United States track down those people who have overstayed using their visas, as opposed to stopping those who want to go. And because from your data, it's not 100% of all those who are gone that overstayed. There's a still huge the majority of those people who have gone on those visas have returned based on the data that the US has provided. So why stop these people from going when the US itself is not even sure those who are going to overstay and those who would come back? Why not take other measures to track down those who have overstayed within the US?
Well, we're doing both. You will have seen since President Trump's inauguration a significant increase in the number of illegal migrants in the United States who have been deported to their home countries. That will continue, not just for Sierra Leoneans, but for all those who have illegally overstayed their visas in the United States. But at the same time, this persistently high overstay rate is one that we need to deal with. The president is acutely aware of the fact that this is not a one-time overstay rate, that these rates have been persistently high for some time. We have tried a number of other strategies in order to bring them down over successive U.S. administrations, including the first Trump administration, using a combination of stricter interviewing techniques, stricter controls at our border for those attempting to enter, public relations campaigns. None of those have brought the overstay rates down. So the president has decided that it is now time for us to pause in the issuance of certain visa categories, and it is only certain visa categories for Sierra Leoneans, take a comprehensive look at our internal processing, talk with the Sierra Leonean government about what more can be done to try to ensure the integrity of Sierra Leonean identity documents, civil registry documents, those things upon which we base visa issuance, and make sure that when we do resume visa issuance to Sierra Leoneans in these categories, and we will likely at some point resume issuance of visas, that those overstay rates will be much lower. It costs the United States a significant amount of money every time we have to track down and deport any national who has overstayed in the United States. And frankly, we don't want to continue, the US taxpayer doesn't want to continue to have to expend that money. So their expectation is that we work not just on the back end in sending people back to their home countries, but also at the front end to prevent people from going who intend to overstay. So we're trying a new strategy, we're retooling, and I hope at some point, assuming we're able to come to an agreement with the Sierra Leonean government on new forms of cooperation, we'll be able to resume visa issuance in those categories.
Ambassador, Sierra Leone and the US have enjoyed a very rosy, if I should describe it in that manner, diplomatic marriage since 1961. It's now almost 64 years being together. There were highs and lows. It's like a roller coaster, actually. You know, not all rosy, but you get the gist. I wanted to ask, with all frankness, please, what effect can someone overstaying in the US have or pose to your national security, or threat generally that someone can pose to America? Let's say a Sierra Leonean overstaying in the US. What threat can that possibly pose to your government that you would wish to, you know, return them to their country?
Sure, we've had situations where Sierra Leoneans who have overstayed their visas have committed serious crimes in the United States. Okay. Not saying that this is because they are Sierra Leonean or trying to disparage the Sierra Leoneans, most of whom go and stay and come back as they're supposed to. But the reality is that tiny, tiny minority that does commit crimes in the United States raises serious concerns. The president cited an Egyptian national recently who carried out an atrocious attack upon Jewish American citizens in the United States, essentially a hate crime. That individual probably should never have been admitted to the United States. And there are numerous other stories like that that are out there in our society. So even though it's a tiny minority that engages in criminal activities, a tiny minority of those who travel to the United States who choose to violate our laws, we have to take our border security seriously for that reason, in the same way that Sierra Leone takes your border security seriously. I know the work that goes into policing your own border. I've met with your Immigration and Customs Service. I know how seriously they take their responsibilities to screen those who are traveling to Sierra Leone to make sure that that criminal element does not come into your country. And we take that seriously in the United States as well.
I've actually been going through the statistics. I understand. I mean, I can never doubt the intelligence of the US. Sierra Leone is just 8.5. But we've risen to like 8.7 in the last 2-3 years since the last census. The population in Ghana, as at recent statistics, about 35 million people. Our number pales into utter insignificance when compared to countries like this. For Nigeria, for instance, there are about 227.9 million people there. Now, an article written by African News in 2024 states that, I quote, according to Africa, a newly released report from the US government highlights a notable shift in visa overstays pattern, showing Ghana surpassing Nigeria in misuse of B1, B2, F, M, and J non-immigrant visas between October 2022 and September 2023. So, Ambassador, in all honesty, wouldn't you say that we do not pose much of a threat to your country than perhaps some of these other countries, these huge, you know, population statistics in Africa?
Yeah, so what I can say, and I brought the CBP statistics with me because I don't memorize every country. Sure. So Sierra Leone's overstay rate is above 15% for B1, B2. Yes. Ghana's overstay rate is 7.5%, only half of yours. So considerably smaller. Nigeria's overstay rate is 7.14%. Again, less than half of yours, considerably smaller. Now, there are more travelers from those countries.
I understand.
There's no question. But we're not looking at total number of travelers. We look at the percentage of those travelers who use their visa appropriately versus the percentage who don't. So we're gravely concerned when any country hits above 10%. And when you hit 15% and are the 13th highest in the globe on misuse for business and tourist visas, that attracts the attention of the administration, and the president has to react.
Which brings me to the other question, Mr. Ambassador. How many visas, I mean, does the embassy, you know, can issue on a yearly basis or an annual basis?
So,
how much have you given the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, so in fiscal year, the last fiscal year, I have the statistics for, there were, it's about 4,000 annually that are issued.
Do you actually give 4,000 visas to Sierra Leone?
B1, B2s. So that would be B1, B2 visas for tourists and immigrants.
In actuality, do you give out 4,000 visas to Sierra Leoneans on a yearly basis?
Yeah, that's about the number that we give out in tourist and business visas. We give many more. There's also other categories, but I'm looking at the tourist and visa category here.
Earlier on, you spoke about new measures or additional measures, which would also require the cooperation of the government of Sierra Leone. We're curious to hear those measures and how can the government of Sierra Leone cooperate?
So I don't want to go into diplomatic discussions that I'm having with the government, but we are in the process of discussing with them ideas, concepts. This will be a dialogue, not the United States presenting a list of you musts. This is going to be a dialogue with them about how they can improve their civil registry management, how they can improve document security with passports, with birth certificates, with marriage certificates, with death certificates, all of the things that we use to establish identity, age, eligibility to travel. The specifics around what they should do on those, I think, is something that we have to dialogue with the government about to understand their processes, and then we can provide them some ideas on best practices, things that they might do in order to better secure those documents. Now, I fully accept the government cannot control an individual's behavior once they get to the United States, and nobody's asking them to do the impossible or the unreasonable. What we're looking at is how can we make sure that there are credible civil registry documents, credible identity documents upon which our visa officers here, our officers at the port of entry can base their decisions.
The U.S. Embassy had done, I assume, proper vetting of those who had applied for visas. Currently, there are visa holders who now are skeptical about the trip or their trips, whether or not it would hold. What's the fate of those who currently hold a visa, those who had their visas before the pronouncement?
So the president was very clear in the proclamation that we are not revoking current visas. So if you had a valid visa that was issued prior to the proclamation going into effect at midnight Eastern Standard Time today, then you are still able to travel to a U.S. port of entry using that visa like you were before to apply for entry to the United States through a Customs and Border Protection officer. Now, it has always been the case before the proclamation, and will always be the case after the proclamation, that at the end of the day, the interviewing officer has to be convinced that you are arriving for a legitimate purpose consistent with your visa, and they make the final decision, as they always have, on admission. But you are, if you had a visa, still free to travel to the port of entry to seek that admission.
The other concern of President Trump is with the citizenship status. People who go to the U.S., well, specifically in this context for Sierra Leone's case, pregnant women who go to the U.S. for the purpose of giving birth and then returning to their home country after obtaining a citizenship status for their children. You would say the category of pregnant women who actually have the wherewithal to go to the U.S. for delivery, because this isn't free again, this is something they pay for, is the upper class, the haves, not really the have-nots. What threat does this really pose to the U.S.? Well, how does this inconvenience the U.S.?
This is a policy debate within the United States, and the president has made the decision that we are not going to allow what they call birth tourism going forward. So if the primary purpose of a woman traveling to the United States is to give birth so that her child will be a U.S. citizen, that is not going to be allowed going forward. That is an ideological debate within the United States that gets into a lot of domestic politics, questions about whether this is appropriate, what should U.S. citizenship be. As you know, the president has proposed, now tied up in the courts, a new interpretation that says that you have to be a legal entry, you have to be legally present in the United States in order to qualify to pass on citizenship to your child. So this is an active debate about the nature and context of U.S. citizenship that's taking place in our own country, and the president has the right and has chosen to exercise it to restrict that form of travel to the United States for the time being.
So there is that restriction now. You can't become a U.S. citizen automatically now by birth.
Well, you still do, because the court has enjoined the president from applying the executive order about whether one needs to be legally present in the United States to pass on citizenship to your child. So for most of the history of our country, certainly since our Civil War, the interpretation has been that aside from diplomats, if you are present in the United States and you give birth to a child in the United States, that child automatically acquires U.S. citizenship. The president and many in Congress have a different interpretation of the Constitution. Their interpretation is that in order to pass on citizenship, you have to be legally present in the United States. So you have to be there in a legal category in order to pass citizenship on to your child. The president issued an executive order instructing the executive branch to follow his interpretation. Several courts have now enjoined that application, saying that it violates their view of what the Constitution says. This will ultimately have to go to our Supreme Court for a final ruling. But for now, that executive order is enjoined, and anyone who is present in the United States, other than diplomats, pass on citizenship to their child when they give birth.
Sounds like medical tourism. Because, as I stated earlier, these women who go to give birth in the U.S., they pay for the service. It's not free. So that in itself contributes towards revenue generation. It contributes to the economy in the United States of America.
Yet some women pay for giving birth in the United States. Many others choose to use Medicaid or federal government or state and city government funding in order to pay for the birth of their child. Others, unfortunately, give birth and then leave the United States without paying their hospital bills in full for the delivery of their child. So there are categories where, in fact, we do not recover the cost for someone giving birth. But again, this is a philosophical debate, not about the economic cost and benefits of this. You're certainly laying out one point of view that's prevalent in the United States. But the other side's view is that only those who are legally present in the United States should gain the benefit of being able to have their children obtain U.S. citizenship. So they are very much of the view that U.S. citizenship should pass either from U.S. citizens to their children or should be restricted only to those who have followed our laws in coming into the United States to give birth. Now, as I said, this is something that's going to play out, I think, in our courts as well as in our political sphere, and there is a robust debate with people on both sides of the aisle. But the view of the president and the current administration is very much that we need to restrict U.S. citizenship to those who are either the children of U.S. citizens or whose parents were legally present in the United States at the time of their birth, and that we should not allow people to travel to the United States specifically to pass on citizenship to their children.
Mr. Ambassador, I understand that as of today, you will stop issuing some categories of visas. What are these categories?
So at this time, we are no longer going to be issuing tourist visas. We are no longer going to be issuing business visas. We are no longer going to be issuing student visas, and we're no longer going to be issuing what we call exchange visitor visas, which is another type of student visa. We're also restricting the issuance of immigrant visas. So for immigrant visas, it will be primarily restricted to those who have family members in the United States who are either citizens or legal permanent residents, and then a few other very specific categories that are not used very often.
When you said family, who do you refer to?
So it's immediate relatives. So it's what we call IR 1 to 5. So spouses of U.S. citizens, children of U.S. citizens and permanent residents, sons and daughters of them, parents. I think siblings are included in there. But if you have applied for an immigrant visa, if you are in category IR 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you will know that if you have applied which one you fall into, then you are still eligible to receive a visa to travel to the United States.
The news was flying on social media that the U.S. Embassy had sent correspondence to the airport stopping people with particular kinds of visas.
No, that is categorically untrue.
Okay.
First, the embassy would never do that. That's not our role. Any communication to transportation carriers, airlines, would come from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Service directly to those carriers. So no, we have not said anything like that. And as I said, the guidance is that those who have visas are able to travel to a U.S. port of entry in order to apply to enter the United States, same as they always were.
Mr. Ambassador, do you like football?
Yes, I do.
Which team do you support, if you don't mind?
So I follow DC United back home.
Okay. You know, we're approaching the World Cup.
Yes,
It's a huge global event.
yes.
A lot of people will be, well, disenfranchised, if you like, you know, from Sierra Leone to attend these things. Do you think that is a problem already? Or will it be a problem?
Yeah, so for those who are traveling to compete in the World Cup, the president has given a waiver so that those who are traveling to compete can still continue to do so, even if they are from one of the countries where they would otherwise be restricted. For spectators, I'm afraid that if they don't currently hold a B1, B2 visa, they will not be able to travel to the United States at this time if they come from one of the countries that is either banned or restricted.
So, Ambassador, in all honesty, how long do you think this hiatus, if you like, or gap will exist for?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer. The president has instructed that there be a 90-day review, so it will be in effect most likely for at least 90 days, during which time we hope to work with all countries in order to address whatever deficiencies have been identified. Where countries will fall after that 90-day review depends, I think, largely on where we are in the diplomatic discussions and their actions. He's instructed that after that initial 90-day review, that there be a review every 180 days of any countries that remain on the list, to make sure that we are allowing countries that are doing the right thing to come off of the list. And potentially, he's also said that if there are other countries that we find become deficient or suddenly show very high overstay rates, that they can be added subsequently to the list.
I understand that there will be people who had applied actually before this proclamation was published. What happens to them now?
So we are going to continue to conduct visa interviews, but we will not be able to approve visas. So if you have applied for a B1, B2 visa and have an interview scheduled, those interviews will remain scheduled at the embassy. But if you are found to be otherwise qualified for the visa, we will still have to refuse it under the presidential proclamation.
So in essence, you're saying that there's no need for these interviews, so push not sure.
That's a decision that everyone individually has to make, whether or not they want to keep their interview. That's not something that I can tell people whether they should or shouldn't. That's something they need to decide for themselves based on consultations with their lawyers and others going forward. So I don't want to say you shouldn't appear for your interview, but what I can tell you is that even if you are otherwise qualified for a B1, B2, or a student visa, we would have to refuse it under the presidential proclamation.
Until after the 90-day cycle?
Until after the proclamation is lifted, possibly at the 90-day mark, hopefully at the 90-day mark, but it will depend upon where we are in the discussions and the implementation.
For the people who had won the DV lottery, who was supposed to travel but now aren't traveling, what would be the overall outcome of their status? Is it that the trip would be postponed, or do they have to go through the entire process much later on if the DV process is resumed?
So if they have a valid visa, if they've already been issued their immigrant visa, they can still travel, just like anyone else. They can still travel and apply for entry at the port of entry in the United States. This applies only to those who do not currently hold visas. So if you have not yet been issued your diversity visa, immigrant visa, we cannot issue it at least for the next 90 days. So they are going to need to wait until that 90-day period has expired before we could issue a new visa, and the presidential proclamation has been lifted. The reality for most DV holders who have not yet received their immigrant visa is that it is very unlikely, even if the proclamation were lifted at the end of 90 days, that they would be able to receive their visa before the expiration of their eligibility on September 30th of this year. If they do not receive their immigrant visa, then they would need to reapply to the DV lottery for next year. DV diversity visa status is only good for a single fiscal year.
Let's look at the MCC compact. Sierra Leone has had its own political disagreements with the ruling SLPP and the main opposition, APC. The tripartite committee put together, and the speculation or assumption has been that the government only cooperated because the US embassy was between the SLPP-led government and the main opposition. And one of the incentives for cooperation was the MCC money they were looking forward to, which is now not forthcoming. And we still see another disagreement brewing with the census situation and new districts being introduced. The MCC not forthcoming at this time could perhaps really, the absence of it could be the absence of that incentive for government to be able to sit together with the main opposition to quench or dilute chaos. So
I think folks overestimate the role of the United States in being able to bring the two parties together. I'm very happy whenever we can assist with something like that, but at the end of the day, the decisions that were made both by the SLPP and the APC, I think, were made because they recognized that they were in the best interests of Sierra Leone as well as the best interests of their own political supporters. So I don't believe that the absence of any incentives from the U.S. side is going to significantly alter what is in the best interest politically for the SLPP and the APC. I fully expect that they will implement what's contained in the tripartite agreement. They've made that commitment. Every discussion I've had with both the government and the opposition is that they both very much intend to move forward with that implementation. So I don't believe that that's going to be paralyzed. I'll also say, the New York Times article was full of speculation about what's going to happen with the MCC. Much of it, having just returned from Washington, I can tell you was completely untrue. In fact, the MCC is right now continuing as an independent organization and will continue to have projects overseas. The compacts that we have signed as of right now remain in force. The administration is, as is appropriate for new administration, reviewing all of those compacts to make sure that they're in line with administration priorities. But I do not think that at this time we should make any assumption that the Sierra Leone Compact is going away or is not going to be fulfilled. One, it's far too early in the process to make that assumption. And secondly, we as the U.S. government have made no statement or indication that we intend to do anything with the Sierra Leone Compact other than move forward with it. So we'll see how the process ultimately evolves, but I think it's much too early for anyone to be writing off the MCC Compact.
Overstay in the U.S., is it the method that the people who overstay use that is the issue, or it's the overstay itself?
It's the overstay itself that we're concerned with. The fact that someone has chosen to violate our laws and remain beyond their legal period of admission is in and of itself a concern to the United States.
How do we juxtapose that with even the U.S., for example, people from the U.S. who come to Sierra Leone on official visits, and at some point they fall in love with Sierra Leone and decide to make Sierra Leone home? We have seen those people. We had Peter Penfold, who was an ambassador at some point. He fell in love with Sierra Leone. He got back, and Sierra Leone almost became home to him. We've seen other, whether it's Americans, people from the UK, different parts of the world who come to Sierra Leone, as underdeveloped as Sierra Leone is, who fall in love with the country and just choose to stay. You would say that's a common human factor, to get to one location and say, oh, I've fallen in love with this place, I changed my mind, I'm not going back home, I'm going to make here home.
Well, I hope that those who fall in love with Sierra Leone, at least from the United States side, don't simply stay. I hope they comply with your immigration laws, do what is necessary to legally adjust their status, and remain in a legal status in Sierra Leone. That's all we ask of Sierra Leoneans going to the United States. If you choose to enter the United States and then subsequently decide you want to stay, you marry an American citizen, you take a job with a U.S. company, as long as you adhere to the process to adjust your status from that of a non-immigrant to a different category, that's fine. We have legal pathways that people can use to do that. And what we ask is that people use those legal pathways if they wish to remain. The problem is the Sierra Leoneans we're talking about who are overstays are not those who use the legal pathways. They are those who chose not to use the legal pathways and just remain without changing their status to that of a legal immigrant, a legal permanent resident. That is certainly permitted. What is not permitted is simply to decide, well, I have a B1, B2 visa, I'm in the United States now, I'm just going to stay here, which a lot of people do, unfortunately.
It's a good thing you've clarified, Mr. Ambassador, because before now we thought the U.S. doesn't just like people lingering around.
Yeah, we are very much a country that's based on the rule of law. We welcome those who want to come to the country legally. We encourage people to come legally. We have provisions in the law that allow for adjustment of status of those who meet the criteria that's required under our law. What we cannot tolerate are those who simply come and then without following our laws decide to remain in the United States.
So, Ambassador, let's talk about education for a while.
Yes.
You know, the applications have just closed for this year's Fulbright application. I'm sure it's the same for all the other programs like Hobart Humphrey and the likes, the early. What's the fate of those programs going forward?
So I don't know yet what is going to happen with those categories of exchange visitor. The presidential proclamation allows the Secretary of State to issue national interest exemptions to the normal restrictions. We don't yet have guidance as to what those national interest exceptions will consist of, what the criteria will be for those. When we do, we will of course apply them. How broadly they will apply, whether they will cover U.S. government-sponsored exchange visitors like Fulbright scholars, Humphrey scholars, other types of scholarship program, I cannot say at this time. We just don't have that guidance yet.
Are the processes continuing as they are or have been without any interruption?
So
After the application, will you be vetting these applications?
once we receive the applications, we will do the vetting and we will determine eligibility based upon however much money is made available by our Congress for those programs in Sierra Leone. And then we will attempt to move forward, assuming there is a path forward for exchange visitors in those categories. But as I say, I don't yet know what may come forth from the Secretary of State. Those decisions have not been communicated yet.
Particularly so when you know that even if you proceed with these processes, you will not be issuing any student visas.
As of right now, we have no authorization to do that. As I said, there may be at some point things coming down from the department that would change that. But as of right now, if somebody today were to apply, we would have to deny the visa.
The U.S. is a very huge development partner to Sierra Leone. What exactly is the embassy working on at the moment?
Well, we're working on a number of things. So first, in the health sector, we're in the process of transferring all of our health development assistance from USAID to the State Department. That will happen on the 1st of July. So as you can imagine, that involves a lot of reviewing, determining which projects to continue, which ones need to be modified, moving money between agencies, making sure that we do not lose continuity of care as we are making this transition. So we're heavily focused on that right now. In the next fiscal year, we'll probably spend very similar amounts to what we spent in the previous fiscal year on health. We will probably do that through through fewer mechanisms because we want to gain the efficiencies of having fewer implementing partners. That means fewer overhead costs and more dollars actually getting to the programs. So we're looking very closely at that. We're also looking quite a bit at commercial development these days. We're running forward with a number of projects through our Development Finance Corporation that are in the design phase. We're looking very closely at how we can help Sierra Leone develop its critical minerals sector, the expansion of the Sierra Rutile into their phase 2. We're looking at what we might be able to do with some of the new discoveries that were made in the World Bank Geological Survey. We're looking at how we can assist in the energy sector, both through the Nant Energy project, which is still moving forward with DFC, but perhaps expanding that into a broader LNG project for the region. I've got a number of other investors that are looking at doing things like building an oil refinery here in Sierra Leone, so we're working on assisting those. And we're looking, frankly, at infrastructure as well, how we can help with bridges, with roads, those sorts of things through our private sector and through our trade and investment agencies like DFC. Right now, the priority, having just got back from Washington over the weekend, the priority that I heard consistently from senior levels of the administration was private sector investment, private sector trade, private sector development, do everything we can to use U.S. government tools to support our private sector as it seeks to help move Sierra Leone forward on its development journey. So that's very much going to be the focus moving forward. I think you'll see much more money moving through entities like the Development Finance Corporation, the Trade and Development Agency, the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Agencies we haven't always talked a lot about in Sierra Leone, but agencies that have been active here that look at Sierra Leone as a very important developing market and really want to be engaged in moving the country forward.
Like companies, corporate entities, corporate social responsibility does help beyond the help it renders in their communities. It sort of better situates them, the respect accorded to them in that community. You could take that situation and perhaps mirror that to what governments do across. We see the UK, the US, China, other nations try to help underdeveloped countries, foreign aid, many different things. Sort of that soft power for that extra reverence that they give to certain countries. At a time like this, when more and more countries and continents are sort of trying to intensify their relationships with some African countries, where does this leave the reverence the love for America, the fear of America, the respect for America when aid is being withheld, all these restrictions? Where does this leave the image of America in the eyes of non-Americans, particularly Africa?
So my view has always been that if we're going to move Africa towards development, it has to be through a private sector model. Governments should not be the primary creator of jobs on this continent. It has to be business. Governments are not the ones who are going to ultimately increase household wealth. It has to be businesses. Governments, frankly, are not going to be the ones that can afford to do the infrastructure development. It has to be led through the private sector. And that's the new mantra that the United States is adopting. We tried the model through USAID, frankly, since 1960. The sad reality is we are still working on many of the same issues that we were working on in 1960. And that means that we've not made the progress that we need to in the development sphere, not just in Sierra Leone, but across the continent. And that means we need to try something different. And I think this new focus on really using the private sector, using US government development dollars to de-risk private sector investment is the way that we're going to see Africa move forward. And I think ultimately, as Africans see the benefits of this, the respect, the warm relations, the warm feeling to the United States will still be there. Now, we're not backing out of the things that really only governments can do. We are going to continue being a leader in humanitarian assistance, feeding people who need it, making sure people who are in dire straits get medicines. As the Secretary has made very clear, those life-saving interventions will continue to be the priority of the United States. That's where we will put the traditional development dollars that will run through the State Department. But when it comes to other areas where it's not about saving lives, it's about trying to actually move the economy forward, we're going to partner with the private sector, who are the ones who should be the engines of growth, moving the economy forward and really change that dialogue.
For the visa restrictions, what happens to those who had applied for universities in the US who had gotten their visas? And what happens to those who had applied who had not gotten the visas?
Yeah. So if you already
have paid their tuition?
Sure. Well, if you've already have your student visa, you are free to use that to travel to the United States, just as you were before. You will apply with that visa for entry with a Customs and Border Protection officer. That person will ultimately make the final decision on admission to the United States, but that process will go on as it always has. For those who do not yet have student visas, we're not going to be able to issue student visas until such time as the presidential proclamation is lifted. So if you have if you do not have a student visa, and you have already been accepted into the university, you need to talk with your university because you are unlikely to be able to begin this semester. Now, many times universities will happily delay admission for a year or a semester. Certainly in this situation, universities will be understanding about the fact that students are not going to be able to show up at the start of term in August because we won't yet be at 90 days to even begin the review. So I think for those students who were not able to get their visa prior to the proclamation going into force, it's time to have an honest conversation with your university that you're not going to be able to start in the fall semester, and to talk with them about delaying to either the spring semester or to next fall.
In your clarifications this morning, you said that those people who even qualify for B1 visas, who have not gone for their appointments yet, their interview, even when they go through the interview, even though they're eligible to get the visas, they would be denied. They would not be given the visas.
That is correct.
But what happens after the 90 days review? If the proclamation by the president, by President Trump, is lifted, would they be then given their visas, or do they have to go through the application process all over again?
You're asking a question to which I don't yet have guidance from the department. So I don't know is the answer to the question. I do not know whether they would need to reapply. I do not know whether there will be an automatic issuance of those who are denied under the proclamation when the restrictions are ultimately lifted. It's just a question we do not yet have guidance on. It's not been the focus of policymaking in Washington. The first focus was dealing with the immediate presidential proclamation and getting those immediate guidance into effect. Those sorts of questions you're asking, just like the national interest exception question, are ones that will come out, I'm sure, in the following weeks and months. But as of right now, I don't know.
So for those people who would be eligible to get the visa, who only would be denied because of the president's proclamation, would their visa fees be refunded?
No. No, we don't refund visa application fees because the fee that folks pay is not a fee for issuance of the visa in Sierra Leone. There are some countries where there is an issuance fee. Sierra Leone is not one of those. So for Sierra Leoneans, the fee that you pay is the cost of processing that application and conducting the visa interview. Just like those who are refused for any other reason, we do not refund visa fees because it is an application fee, not an issuance fee.
The restrictions, are they for Sierra Leoneans or for Sierra Leone? I asked because you would find that there are Sierra Leoneans who also apply for U.S. visas through other U.S. embassies in other countries. Yep. And also in Sierra Leone, there are other nationalities who apply for a U.S. visa in Sierra Leone.
So it applies to Sierra Leonean nationals, so those who carry a Sierra Leonean passport and are applying for a visa on that passport, regardless of where you apply. For those who are not Sierra Leonean nationals and not one of the other 17, I think, in total that are on the list of restricted or banned, that visa processing continues as normal. So if you are, for example, Nigerian or Ghanaian or Liberian and applying in Freetown, you are still free to do so and we can still issue your visa. The restriction is on Sierra Leonean nationals. For Sierra Leonean nationals who apply in a third country, the restriction would still apply. For Sierra Leonean nationals who have two passports, so you have nationality of both Sierra Leone and, say, the United Kingdom, you are still free to travel on your United Kingdom passport. So it is only for those who are traveling on their Sierra Leonean passport that the restriction would apply.
So, Ambassador, let's come back to the situation. What's the way out? I mean, the statistics are there. You said that people are overstaying in the U.S.
Right.
What can you do to solve this?
So I think some of this is personal responsibility. People need to use their visas appropriately, and we've talked about this before. Individual decisions have implications for the broader citizenry of Sierra Leone. So people need to take responsibility and be civic-minded and use their visas for the reasons that they were issued, and then return when their stay is done in the United States. So that's part of it. In terms of what can the government do, which I think is what a lot of people here are asking, I would say we're going to have an active dialogue with them. But what it fundamentally comes down to are questions around the security of civil registry documents, the availability of criminal records, the availability of court records, so that we can adequately vet those who are going to be traveling to the United States. So I think strengthening civil registry document issuance, making sure that there is searchable databases that are available that we can use to verify those civil registry documents, making sure that there are searchable databases of criminal records that include all criminal records from Sierra Leone, making sure that court records that talk about criminal convictions are available, arrest records are available. Those are the sorts of things that President Trump is primarily concerned with and believes that foreign governments can do in order to resolve this matter. Obviously, no one expects the government to be able to force its citizens to return to Sierra Leone. That's beyond its capability. But what we are talking about really is around the security and availability of civil registry documents, criminal registry documents, court records.
Are government officials also caught up in this crossfire? Are they affected?
So if they are traveling for official or diplomatic business in the United States, no, because they use a different category of visa. So those who qualify to travel on government business to the United States for either business with the United States or business with international organizations like the UN, the IMF, and the World Bank, they will still be able to get their visas and travel and conduct that business in the United States.
The UNGA summit is approaching. Will this particular new situation, if I should say, or mirror of things unfolding, affect people who will be going to the United States to participate in the UN program?
No, if they are government employees, they are still eligible to receive what we call a G visa, which is the type of visa that allows them to travel for the UN General Assembly, or for any other UN business, or for IMF business, or for World Bank business.
Let's say they're not government people, they are journalists, media people.
So journalists do not travel on B1, B2 visas. If you are going to report as a journalist, you travel on what's called an I visa. And I visas are still available, and we can issue those. So if you are a journalist traveling for business purposes to the United States to cover the UN General Assembly or to do any other sort of reporting in the United States, you are still eligible to receive an I visa.
For people who travel to the US for medical checkups, can they now still make those trips?
If they have a valid B1, B2 visa, yes. If they are trying to apply for a B1, B2 visa, no, they're not able to get one.
What about in exceptional cases of medical emergencies? Because obviously,
Yeah.
even the US is aware that our medical infrastructure in
Sure.
country cannot in any way be compared to that of the US.
Sure. So at this time, I don't yet have guidance on national interest exceptions. The Secretary of State was given the authority by the President to make those. We don't yet know what may be contained in those. So the answer is I don't know at this time how the Secretary will choose to treat those cases.
There are those who were scheduled to travel to the US or intending to travel to the US who are either grossly pissed or grossly bitter about these restrictions. How can the Sierra Leonean population contribute to the solution to this problem of Sierra Leoneans overstaying in the US?
Well, so I would hope
Being that
yeah.
everyone else is now affected.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope if they were planning to travel to the United States in the next 90 days, they would have already had their visa, because people really should apply well in advance of their travel for a variety of reasons, including eventualities like this. But for those who are caught up and want to contribute constructively to the discussion, I think the best thing that they can do is, one, to encourage friends and family members who are traveling to the United States, who do have visas, to use those visas in line with the purpose for which those visas were issued, to abide by the laws of the United States, to return on schedule. You know, I think at this point the government has been very forward-leaning and wants to collaborate. So I don't think there's need for significant public pressure on the government in talking with a wide variety of government officials. The question has been, what can we do? How can we resolve this? They seem very committed to trying to meet whatever the concerns are that President Trump has. The information minister was very clear in his interview with the BBC that that was the approach the government was taking. So I think that your government really does want to lean forward and be cooperative on this, and will continue to engage with them.
For the percentage of Sierra Leoneans overstaying in the US,
Yeah.
what passport categories are those? Are they just people holding ordinary passports, or do they include diplomatic and service passport holders?
So we don't track the type of Sierra Leone passport that individuals travel into the United States on when we're doing these statistics. We track the US visa category. So it is possible for a diplomatic official to go on vacation to Disney World with a B1, B2 visa. I don't know how many of those who overstay may have been in that category of diplomatic passport holders who were traveling for purposes other than diplomatic purposes. I can say that we do track the overstay rates for other categories of visas, including A's and G's and I's, and there's a whole alphabet list there. The rates in other categories are lower than in the B1, B2, for overstays are lower than in the B1, B2 and student visa categories.
But in those categories, do you know if it's the type of passport?
Yeah, that's not a statistic that DHS tracks because we're primarily interested in the category of US visa. Yeah, I don't have numbers on that as to how many of those with B1, B2 visas had ordinary versus service versus diplomatic.
So, Ambassador, earlier you said the U.S. is open to people who would wish, or want to change their status in the U.S. I want to believe perhaps the problem also with this thing we are seeing is lack of education. Do you think that all of these people who are staying there know that they can actually do this through legitimate means?
So most of those that we end up deporting from the United States would not be in categories that would have qualified to adjust their status.
Oh.
The vast majority of those are folks who had no legal right to work in the United States, but chose to remain to do that anyway without going through the proper procedures. So they would not just automatically be able to adjust status. One has to fall within certain categories to do that. Just like under Sierra Leonean law, I can't just decide to stay in Sierra Leone. I have to meet the criteria under Sierra Leonean law. We also have criteria, and most of those that we end up deporting did not meet that criteria, and that's why they chose to overstay. Now, there may be some who just didn't realize the opportunity was out there, and certainly I believe that we are doing a better job now, particularly under the Trump administration, of making people aware of what they need to do in order to be in legal status in the United States. And I think the increase in deportation certainly is an incentive for folks to find out that information and to adjust status. And we are seeing more of that happening now than in the past.
Mr. Ambassador, if you could help us diminish our idiocy around this, educate us a bit this morning. What criteria were you referring to that would otherwise legitimize someone
so the most
becoming a citizen?
Yeah, there are several paths to changing status in the United States. The two most common: I'm a student, I fall in love, I marry an American citizen, I am now the spouse of an American citizen. That is by far the most common way in which people adjust status. The other way is I'm a student in the United States, I am recruited by a US company to work for them following graduation. They file paperwork with the Department of Labor that meets the necessary criteria, and then you receive the paperwork that says you are now offered a formal job by a US company. You can now adjust status in order to remain in the US to work for that company. Those are the two most common ways. There are other ways involving investment and things like that, but those are the two that we see most frequently.
Lastly, you also said that there are people within this category of, or sects of people who have overstayed in the US who do not actually qualify to change their status.
Right.
What criminalizes them?
So under US law, if you are not in a legal status, a legal visa status, you have committed what we call a civil violation under US law, meaning that you can be fined and you can be removed from the United States.
What does this mean? How does it look like an illegal visa status?
So I go to the United States on my B1, B2 visa.
Okay.
When I arrive at the border, they stamp me in. That stamp says you can remain for 90 days.
Oh.
I choose to stay for 120 days because, for whatever reason, I decide I'm going to ignore the 90-day and stay for 120. On day 91, you are out of status. You have committed a civil violation in the United States, and you are subject to both fines and removal from our country.
The U.S. Embassy, prior to now, didn't conduct interviews for government officials to travel to the U.S., but you have incorporated that. Why are government officials now being interviewed?
So we've always done some amount of interviewing of government officials. We have expanded that in close consultation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make sure that all of those traveling meet the relevant criteria under our law to qualify for an A or a G visa. It is not every government official that we are interviewing. It is those that we and the ministry have agreed require an interview to verify their bona fides of travel.
What informed that change in pattern?
Consultation with the visa section at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We want to make sure we have a shared interest in making sure that all travelers meet the criteria. There were some that inadvertently slipped through who were not government employees, not by any malfeasance, just by misunderstandings, and it was determined that to avoid that in the future, that we would, for people who were not clearly approvable, we would conduct interviews to make sure that they complied with our law and were given the right category of visa, because it is very inconvenient both for us and for the Sierra Leone government when someone arrives at the port of entry with the wrong type of visa and ends up either being refused entry to the United States or paroled in. It's messy. So both sides agreed that it was better to do the work up front to make sure that every traveler who was going for official and diplomatic business met the criteria under U.S. law for that visa category.
To Sierra Leoneans who have never been to the U.S., with hopes and dreams of getting to the U.S. someday, should they give up on that dream in the nearest future?
Well, what I would say is that we're in a temporary pause. This is not intended to be forever. I'm sure it will not be forever. It is intended to be as short a time period as necessary to address the concerns that President Trump had. And we will do that as expeditiously as possible. So I would say, you know, this summer is probably not the time to try to take your vacation in the United States, but give it till next summer, and my hope is that things will be resolved long before then.
Any departing messages?
Well, I think the important thing to emphasize is that the United States remains committed to a very strong working relationship with Sierra Leone. We are going to continue to engage across the full range of activities. We are committed to working with the Sierra Leone private sector and the U.S. private sector and the government to meet the development challenges that lie ahead for the country. And we are determined, as the Secretary has said many times, to continue to be a strong partner, both here in Sierra Leone and more widely within the African continent.
Just out of curiosity,
yes.
How much does the U.S. Embassy in Sierra Leone receive annually through visa applications?
How many applications do we receive?
No, the figures financially. How much money comes in through?
So the embassy doesn't. So the embassy doesn't receive any of that money directly. That goes to the Treasury in the United States. So it does not. It does not. I don't see the figures that come through. Collect? What do we collect? I don't know. I don't know offhand. I'd have to look that up. I'm sure we have the figure, but we don't. I don't track that because it's not money that I get to spend. So it's not revenue for the embassy operations.
Right. Well, thank you so much indeed, Mr. Ambassador Hunt. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. How many dishes have you tasted, by the way, before I leave you?
Oh, quite a lot at this point. So.
I told you to try gari goat soup.
Yes, I had gari soup. Yes, it was lovely. Yes, yes, I had that. I think I had that when I was out in Kailao, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. I think that's where they prepared it for me, but it was quite nice.
So the next recommendation, since you've tried gari goat soup, you should try two things: mango ebe.
Mango ebe, okay.
Ebe. Then you should try paste and brush. Just ask them what's paste and brush for Mo.
Okay, I will find out what those are. Paste and brush. Okay.
Right, this is Wake Up Sierra Leone here on AYV television and radio. We've been speaking to the U.S. Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Brian David Hunt. We're taking a quick break. When we come back, we'll move to the second segment of the program. We'll be speaking to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Timothy Musakaba. Please stay with us.
Within we hope to achieve in this direction of us having a new constitution. Okay.
Management of the economy now they make it possible for me to pay salaries every month.
The next one, I shouldn't go call me.
All hail the Queen, Miss Hailey Sumana.
Whose cousin is richer than mine? After you nation flag, slayer with brains.
I think he likes you.
Yes, PJ, I love you.
Who is ready to steal my crown?
I see you're in prep to snatch Nava's high crown from Ailey.
You know, Lillian is one of the most well-behaved and composed students here. There must be something wrong.
Like I heard about a certain man who impregnated his wife's niece.
Under my nose, I find it difficult to forgive him.
Now his family is falling apart, and his only daughter is about to commit suicide.
Was Hailey suspended?
No.
Why?
I am Nava's most intelligent and influential student.
You will lose your crown and all your powers.
I am more ready than ever
To snatch your crown.
Can I just the hook, please?
I can't be an agent of the devil.
He must have called me Rashida, which spread to the whole school.
He was actually asking if you aborted the pregnancy he gave you the money for.
That is so untrue. I don't even have a taste for women.
Every girl might want to be with me, but I swear to the sun rays as it beams on the sandy shore every evening, you're the only one my heart beats for.
Does JJ actually love Hailey?
There's a secret she's using to blackmail and trap JJ.
The daughter of a rich and noble Jenkins, wanting to spend the rest of her life with a servant. Delete the video once and for all.
What video?
Rocal SIM Copper Plus is an electronic mobile banking application which connects customers to their respective bank accounts through their mobile phones. With Rocal SIM Copper, you can do cash withdrawal, cash deposit, pay for goods, balance inquiry, transfer from RC bank account to another bank account, utility bills payment, buy airtime for GSM phone, request foreign exchange transactions. It is an application that can be used at any time and anywhere within the confines of Sierra Leone, thereby creating 24 hours access to your account. Rocal Commercial Bank, the bank of choice.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. This is Wake Up Sierra Leone on AYV television and radio. Let's begin with an apology for not reading out your messages in the previous segment.
Indeed. We are truly sorry. However, you could continue to drop those comments on our inbox. The minister is now here. You shall be hearing from him soonest. You are being ushered into the final and second segment of this program, and we've just been joined by the country's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Alhaji Timothy Musa Kabar. The minister is here to talk about Sierra Leone's diplomatic relationship, sort of thing we were discussing just now with the U.S. ambassador, the new U.S. entry restrictions on Sierra Leone by His Excellency Donald Trump 2.0, among other things this morning. Good morning, Mr. Minister. It's a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen in the studio in Sierra Leone.
I mean, you are a huge figure when it comes to diplomatic negotiations, you know, and all of these sort of things for Sierra Leone. As the #1 man when it comes to international cooperation in Sierra Leone, what do you make of this?
A disclaimer, I'm not the #1 man. The chief diplomat as per the Constitution is the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. As minister, I'm more like an envoy of the President on foreign policy issues. Thank you for having me in the studio.
Indeed. As an envoy, what do you make of this? I know you're not speaking for the president, but just as a professional.
Well, I'm speaking on behalf of the president and the people of this country relating to the temporary suspension of certain categories of the United States visa, and Sierra Leone being named as one of the 7 countries that have been proclaimed to have been suspended, for the issuance of visas in those categories. It's not a so pleasant news, for not least for the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but for all the citizens of our country. We have Sierra Leoneans who have gotten admission into universities in the United States that are going to be affected by this suspension. And there are business people who also have businesses or probably have businesses in Sierra Leone who have to apply in and out of the United States to run their businesses. They have been affected. There are those who have also decided, as part of their annual plan, had decided that they will visit the United States for vacation and other purposes, who will not be able to do so. So it's not a pleasant news, and it's one that we're compelled to engage in to ensure that we take a turn on this particular decision that has been made legally.
What will we be doing?
Well, the reasons for the suspension are quite clear. One, historically, it's been noted that Sierra Leone has not been receiving identified deportees with documents bearing, the Republic of Sierra Leone, for example, passport holders, so people who are having Sierra Leonean passport that have overstayed, and also a mention is made of overstaying, like I said. And so what we're going to do, and like we've been engaging with the United States, the ambassador was just here a few moments ago. In this past 2 years, we've been very much cooperative because we believe it's the right thing to do. Anybody who bears our passport is assumed is Sierra Leonean because that document it's an indication and a guarantee of our citizenship. And so we've been actually accepting deportees coming to Sierra Leone, cooperating because it's just the right thing to do. And for the categories of visa that's been suspended, you'll see that the onus is actually on the citizens of our country. Our citizens obtain these visas, they go and they overstay, and there's very little we can do as government because the application process itself is a private application process, a contract between the citizens and the consular section of the United States Embassy, and it's an unfortunate situation. But also going back a little further into history, after the civil conflict and during the civil conflict, there was an exodus of Sierra Leoneans into the West, notably the United States of America. And these Sierra Leoneans benefited from the American version of asylum, which is the TPS, the temporary protection status. And many of those folks did not actually transition into becoming legal people in the United States. And so when there's an intensified crackdown on these illegal and undocumented aliens, and this is what we get a mass deportation. And President Donald Trump has a no tolerance for illegal and undocumented aliens living in the United States. And it happens that we do have quite a lot of people who traveled during the war on Sierra Leonean passport, whether they are naturally Sierra Leoneans or they exploited the opportunities that abounded during the war. This is all affecting us.
So where's your factor? Do you think that's happening?
It is happening.
Using our passport?
Well, there are quite a lot of people who we've seen, I think about a few years ago, 2 folks were deported to Sierra Leone. When they came, they could not sort of assimilate into our society. They posed quite a lot of security threats to our country because they were just not Sierra Leoneans. But they were found with Sierra Leonean documents which traced their origin to our country. So these things happen.
Sierra Leone has suffered some negative publicity, so to speak, in instances when some of these Sierra Leonean passport holders are actually non-Sierra Leoneans, but when they commit crimes, obviously because of the documents they're holding, it's that country, Sierra Leone, that takes responsibility. That being a problem, that being understood by Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, what measures have we put in place as a country especially at the Immigrations Department, to ensure that non-Sierra Leoneans don't come and get access to a Sierra Leonean passport and use that to fly out of the country and then misrepresent Sierra Leone, which would then take the fall for their elections.
That's correct. And I think what genuine applicants, the consequences of this suspension and the impact on genuine applicants, it's a function of the abuse of the visa privilege that is given to our citizens who go and overstay. On the aspect of the passport, I think there are flaws here and there, and this has been the case, but I think it's our responsibility as government, as people, to keep the integrity of that particular department. Our passport should be the most sacred document Sierra Leoneans will use to travel, must have to travel. And so if we compromise the issuance of that document, and if we give those documents to the wrong people, the consequences will be what we're facing today. And I think I join you and the many Sierra Leoneans who are calling for stricter measures, to protect and promote the integrity of our passports.
So you've answered to this in theory, but I'm asking now in practical. What have been the measures put in place to address this problem? Because this is not new information coming to the ministry or to Sierra Leone, that we've had instances when non-Sierra Leoneans are passport holders, are Sierra Leonean passport holders. So it's not a new problem. It's been there for years. What are the practical solutions put in place to address this problem?
Just what I'm saying. I don't work in the Department of Immigration. My role in passport, and I want this for the, for the benefit of the public, is service passport and diplomatic passport. What we do in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when we get the recommendation or the application from the MDA, in the case of service passport, in case of diplomatic passport, that's the prerogative of the President. The President, through the Secretary to the President, will inform the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that this citizen or person is deserving of a diplomatic passport. Therefore, His Excellency has, within the powers of the President, recommended this person for obtaining this particular category of passport. We will now forward the instruction of the President to the Chief Immigration Officer who issues this diplomatic passport under the instruction and directive of the President. With service passport, it comes from MDAs, people who meet certain qualification in the civil service. They are deserving of the service passport. And when it comes to the ministry, we refer to the department. General passport production is exclusively the responsibility of the authorities in the Department of Immigration. But it is our business as a government, it is our business as citizens to ensure that we keep the integrity of this. Let me give you an instance. A few months ago, I was at the airport. Unfortunately, somebody handed a parcel to me and came to me, Mr. Minister, you're going to Abuja, can you take this passport, with a note verbal that this actually came from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but these people are going to Latin America. 10 passport, ordinary passport. I said, okay, open, I will do it. I mean, if there's no contraband, why not? We opened, I saw this passport, I saw the original document for the so-called conference, the note verbal. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, at spot, I knew the note verbal was a counterfeit. And then I dug into it further. I realized, in fact, this is human trafficking. What they do, they use people in our High Commission in Nigeria, they transport this stuff and they give a cover note to the embassy in Nigeria to issue visa to these folks. So what I did, I drew the attention of the police. So we all have a role to play, and those passports were confiscated because it's human trafficking.
So the role that everyone has to play, the expectation is there is some level of collaboration amongst MDAs for the greater good.
I agree.
Foreign Affairs comes in very handy or very situated in the conversation when there are misperformances of Sierra Leonean passport holders in other countries that leads to, in such instances, some soft diplomatic issues here and there. So you are connected in this, but there's an expectation that there's collaboration between your ministry and other MDAs. So asking you about measures being put in place was not in the absence of the knowledge that your ministry, while it does not directly work at the immigration, there should be some collaboration as Foreign Affairs with other MDAs as to let's sit on the table. This has become a diplomatic embarrassment to Sierra Leone. We even have drugs-related scandals. You wonder how much investigation is being done to ascertain all those people with drugs-related scandals of recent times, their Sierra Leonean passports, if they are really Sierra Leoneans or other nationals holding onto Sierra Leonean passports. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs cannot be disconnected from the conversation, even if it's ordinary passports.
Your journey of this explanation is quite understood, and I think it's laborious. I did not exonerate the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from what is happening. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs works in concert with all of the departments that are related to the issuance of our international document. I stated it. I spoke about diplomatic passport and service passport. Ordinary passport are obtained by ordinary citizens right at the department. Service and diplomatic passport go through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the Immigration Department. So we work. We are working in concert. So I want that clarification to
There
go
was
home.
a time,
Now I'm coming.
As you've clarified that, there was a time, I recall, there was information circulating on social media about an Asian-looking fellow holding a Sierra Leonean diplomatic passport. Could you speak to that? Has that ever been a situation in Sierra Leone where foreign nationals hold on to a diplomatic passport?
I beg your pardon. Look, I am foreign minister. I'm not going to be discriminatory or racial here. Yes, an Indian-looking person could have a Sierra Leonean diplomatic passport. Why? It's a prerogative of the president in the first place. But also, there are certain categories of people that can hold our diplomatic passport, for example, which is legal. A consul can apply for Sierra Leonean diplomatic passport because it is accepted by the established laws of diplomatic engagement that you can give your passport to a consul, for example, because they represent the president in that country and they must have a legal document to the effect to show that the country is satisfied and that they are an envoy of His Excellency the President. So the racial thing, I think it's just not in place. Other nationals can have. For example, a native Sierra Leonean can go to another country and obtain a passport when they meet the metal for obtaining the passport. So yes, there is a misuse. There are people who are holding our diplomatic and service passport, our ordinary passport, that are not deserving of those passports. But there is that rule. There are the rules of engagement in how citizens, for example, can naturalize, and through naturalization, they can get our citizenship and get our passport.
Your ministry, Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, is not entirely innocent.
Absolutely. It's complicit to effectively what is happening
It's not
today.
entirely innocent to some of these issues that we've dealt with. Take, for example, government officials now going through an interview at the US Embassy. And part of that, in a very diplomatic way, the US ambassador just nicely put it that some people who should not have had some of those visas or their names and passports slotted in some of these trips were unfortunately slotted in some of these trips. There have been allegations about some workers at your ministry who facilitate putting names of people on lists to travel because they get paid in dollars, thousands of dollars for this. So your ministry itself isn't entirely innocent. Some of the workers in your ministry have helped to contribute to the embarrassment that now Sierra Leone faces. But as the head of that ministry, what have you done understanding these allegations and some of these activities that go on? How are you cleaning your house?
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's always been the case. In fact, some people contact me and say, Mr. Minister, please, program day. I said, what is program? Because it has been a deja vu. It's been, people come and say, there are programs in your ministry. But I tell you what, there have been staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs netted in police custody. I have had, on several instances, had to arrest my own folks, pass them through a ministry's administrative processes, and hand them over to the police. I give you an instance. A certain former member of parliament, bearer of a diplomatic passport, went to Guinea-Conakry, forged a note verbal of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, put the names of people on that list, to go to the Russian Federation. But diplomatic languages are just conventional. I think when the embassy of the Russian Federation in Conakry realized that there was a flaw with the language, what did they do? They referred to us. I took the document and conveyed to the police. These things happen. They happen. When we get rid of them, when we get hold of them, we hand them over to the police. And I'm telling you, today is Monday. I haven't been to the office, right? We are going to institute further investigation to ensure that we take care of this thing because it's causing embarrassment. It's absolutely causing embarrassment. We must keep the integrity of the consular section intact. Of course, it's flawed. Of course, it's Sierra Leoneans. Of course, it's people. They take advantage of it. Like the US ambassador said, some people, when they find their names on this list, they call them for interview because they are doing their job. Right? They know who is a government officer and who is not a government officer. Let me give you another instance. There's a matter I'm investigating in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Office of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. This is with regards to the International Bar Association that had their annual meeting in the UK. Somebody brought a list, they call them State Council. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Consular, said they were dealing with this representative of the Ministry of the Attorney General's office. Something happened in the mix. And then the British picked it up and they brought it because none of the persons on the list is actually a state counsel. The Attorney General and I, we are working very hard to establish the fact of that matter and for action to be taken. These things happen. The broader picture, we are ministers, we oversee the affairs of the ministry, but those little departments, they embarrass us. And for example, we have ministries, departments, and agencies that will send you lists of delegates to attend international conferences. If you do a little work, just dig into it, you find out that some of those folks are not even members of the civil service or the public service.
But some of those MDAs as well have complained that the process between them as institutions sending a list to your ministry, which is the ministry that sends the list to the embassies, that duration from what they send to your ministry and what your ministry finally sends to the embassies, there's a lot of, they distort it. They change names on the list, they take out some and put in some. And that process up until this March 2025 for the UN, for the CSW happened as well.
Okay,
let me
speak to that.
2025, it's still happening.
Now let me speak
How
to that.
many of your workers have been sacked, suspended, or investigated?
So this is about they say, we say, all right? Rumor going out in Sierra Leone today is that the Minister of Foreign Affairs politically expunges names from the CSW. It's not true. I'm not a villain. Yeah? Last year, 258 names were submitted to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for processing of visa for the CSW. Only less than 30 people got the visa. This year, I spoke to the MDAs that are related to CSW that we will not send over 100 applications to the US Embassy. Guess what? In March this year, a certain ministry, the permanent secretary, sent passports to us for CSW and what have you. And this passport actually landed on my table because it was addressed to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. By way of internal document, the parcel came to my office. I opened the envelope. I found 3 ordinary passports. But the memo says that these people are senior directors in this ministry. And I called the permanent secretary. You cannot have senior directors in your ministry who do not have service passport. What can you say about this? And he started babbling. And then I realized there was a problem. With this CSW, like Fabian is saying, the names that were presented to the United States Embassy, the final note verbal that went to the US Embassy came through me, right? And I have an arrangement. I told my folks, when you're sending this list, I must have a final copy because I will send backdoor to the US ambassador so he verifies with his consular section. This is not happening in isolation. I will tell you, it is on both ends. Both people work in the consular section in my ministry and in the other agencies and elsewhere in other institutions. The problem is, right, it has become a culture that people always want to exploit these international conferences to leave the country. When this year's CSW came, we had a meeting with the United States, President Trump's government, that CSW is a donor-driven program and that it's not a high-level UN program, that they will not issue visas to non-relevant persons. Over 100 names were sent to the US Embassy. Less than 15 visas were issued. I had to intervene for those who were deservingly going to attend beneficial programs in the CSW. But you know what? When I started cracking down, they say, oh, this man, they pull a name because it's a déjà vu. It's what they do. But I tell you what, we will continue to keep the integrity of that particular department to ensure that Sierra Leoneans, because I tell you, the Foreign Affairs is, Minister of Foreign Affairs is, Minister of Foreign Affairs consular section is only for government officials, MDAs. Ordinary citizens should apply through the normal US Embassy website and go for their interviews and get their visas. So people want to exploit the fine relations between our two countries where visas are given to their own benefit. Yes, it is true. I have been accosted by people saying, Mr. Minister, you wicked, you pull name them per list. I say, I don't deal with the list. What I do is to keep the integrity of the list. And people also come and say, Mr. Minister, program in our ministry. I say, program? You think that's a programmatic ministry? No, it is not.
But Mr. Minister, wouldn't you agree that until and unless these people are sacked or driven from these MDAs, the problem will not solve?
Who've been doing it? My predecessors have been doing it.
Your ministry?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Who've been sending people to the place. People have been fired. People have been removed. And this has happened. We're going to institute investigation. But the reasons for this is quite clear. Overstaying and the historical failure to accept our citizens. That is the crux. And this decision is independent of our existing relations with the United States. We have a fine bilateral relationship, excluding the suspension. There are 192 countries in the world for the sake of our bilateral relations. We deal with them, and so this is. United States is very important. It's going to affect our citizens. We'll try to remedy the situation. So when there's a review, 90 days from since this proclamation was made, that we will come away, will come out from this particular zone of suspension. Let's all work together. Our people are in the United States overstaying on these visas. Let's encourage them to be law-abiding, to come in good time so that they don't overstay in the United States and we don't get this sort of effect that is affecting even the righteous, the deserving ones that want to go to the United States.
You know, you've just said it yourself. There is a 90-day period which has been set aside against which this particular, proclamation could be reviewed. What do we do then? I mean, tangibly, sir.
So look, they identified Sierra Leoneans for deportation. I have made it a priority. Anytime the ICE of the United States identifies someone as holding documentation from Sierra Leone, I instruct the embassy in Washington to get those people sent to Sierra Leone because they identified with Sierra Leone because they are holding Sierra Leonean documents.
How many of them are we talking about?
Right, we have had a good number of people being sent to Sierra Leone since the President Donald Trump came to office. I'll be cooperating. And so that's one of the reasons our cooperation. The ambassador would have told you that every day we discuss that because there's a mass crackdown on undocumented alien in the United States. Every day I get requests. ICE is calling the embassy, can you intervene? I'll call the embassy and give them instructions. If you prove them beyond all reasonable doubt that they are holding Sierra Leonean document, they went to the United States on Sierra Leonean document, let them be sent back to Sierra Leone.
The ambassador said, I mean, there is another way around this. And for those who are living there already in the US, they could readjust their statuses, to becoming legitimate citizens of the US. Do you support that philosophy?
Well, those who are there, and
Already.
if they can regularize their stay, if the United States, that is the host country, can regularize their stay legally, it's fine and good.
Since you came in, how many? Well, I'm asking, I want to know the number, the total statistics of illegal people you've been dealing with from the US, the inflow from the US to Sierra Leone.
Not illegal people, undocumented Sierra Leoneans in the United States having illegal stay in the United States. Good number, I don't have a count, but there is not an instance since I became Minister of Foreign Affairs where we have turned down the ICE or the United States from, turned down a citizen that has been identified by our embassy in collaboration with the ICE.
The US ambassador didn't seem to know when we asked him this question, the category of passports that mostly overstay in the US. Do you have any data for that?
Well, the State Department has all the data. I mean, like I said, this goes beyond my term, it goes beyond this administration, it goes beyond the administration before this administration, because it's historical, yeah? And so he may not readily have the statistics, but the State Department has the statistics, and it's clear. There's a figure. 15% of these categories overstay this amount, so they spoke about business, student, tourist, visitors, so the problem is there, and the statistics is quite clear.
Are you investigating an alleged human trafficking by some members of parliament, just as you've done for the justice sector?
I cannot investigate members of parliament for child trafficking. That does not fall under my purview. And I am aware, I was copied, it was brought to my notice by the British High Commission, this matter in question, that there is a suspected child trafficking by some members of parliament. And it was also brought to the attention of the Speaker of the House of Parliament. The Speaker and I have engaged, and we're they are conducting investigation. I am the conduit, the diplomatic conduit, and I feel dismayed by that. I believe in the leadership of the Speaker that they will dig into it to help the British government to investigate that, and so that we hold those that are responsible accountable for that. Because it's all of these that cumulatively lead to this sort of embarrassment that we get as a country.
We've seen instances where the Chief Minister himself has, openly affirmed that he himself puts names of people, for these international trips. How do you deal with these instances when public officials feel the need to insert names on the list for these trips?
I would say with certainty that the Chief Minister will not put people on the list to go to the United States to overstay or to run away. These may be people that are relevant to the overseas trip. Let me give you an instance. If you're discussing peace and security in the United Nations Security Council or disarmament, right? You can actually take somebody that is not a government officer, that is related or that could give testimony to the UN Security Council or the panel that is concerned. Yes, it is legal. You obtain visa for them and you bring them back just the way you took them.
Let's look at how we as a country treat our own country seriously. We've seen the US issuing, visa bans here and there, restrictions. But we as well in Sierra Leone have non-Sierra Leoneans, whether it's from the US, the UK, whichever part of the world, who come and stay in Sierra Leone. What are our own protocols?
So, for example, we have visa on arrival. People get visa on arrival. Those who are working in this country obtain work permits and they get temporary stay in the country. And I guess just like every other nation, when they overstay or they are illegally residing in our country, the authorities that are concerned with the state security, because when people overstay, like stated in the United States press, it poses national security threat. For example, where we cater for the public, for a public of 1,000 people, and you have undocumented aliens, you know, populating that area, and you have 500 more of those that are not Sierra Leoneans that are illegally settling in that area for whom the government has not catered for in the budget. It causes hardship, and that hardship culminates into insecurity. So yes, I think immigration does reading, and Ministry of Labor, they check with industries, they check on people that are not well documented, and there are ways and means, just like every other functional country, where these undocumented aliens are identified and repatriated to their countries of origin.
Do we have the needed apparatus in country to keep track of such people who are illegally in the country, people who have overstayed, and this includes everyone and anyone? Do we have the apparatus to keep track of that data, to collect and keep track?
Yes, we are a functional state. I'm very aware of instances where, for example, the QNet issue, and there have been, I think, last year or a few months ago, I can't remember exactly when, I had the the ambassador of Zimbabwe resident in Ghana visiting Sierra Leone. For Zimbabwean citizens that were living in sort of captivity in one of the provincial headquarter towns, they were brought into Sierra Leone illegally to do internet scamming. What happened when we got the news? We conveyed it to the ONS and to the police. They went, they raided, and they got those illegal folks that were brought in for criminal activities back to their countries. Yes, the intelligence services, the police, they have the capability and the capacity to actually crack down, identify undocumented foreign nationals living in our country and repatriating them to their countries.
For other people across the world who require a visa to enter Sierra Leone, what's our visa criteria?
Well, there are different categories of visa. Our embassies sometimes turn down people, just like every other embassy would turn down someone if they don't feel they meet the metal or they deserve the visa they're applying for.
I asked because is there a requirement for background check for these people?
I would suppose.
For security reasons?
I would suppose, yes.
I am asking because you wonder, how did someone like Jos Lijekers, who is obviously not in the category of people who would enter Sierra Leone visa-free, he would require a visa to get to Sierra Leone. You would wonder, how did someone like Jos Lijekers, whose name at the click of a research on a computer would raise red flags, how did such an individual make it into Sierra Leone? And this is just one of such examples of people in Sierra Leone who are either wanted criminals in other parts of the world, or who just are not well-meaning people living amongst us who got entry into the country.
Fabian, it's a good question, but I may not readily have the answer because I don't know how the person in question got into Sierra Leone, which document they used to get to Sierra Leone. These things happen. We see people in different countries of the world, they travel on different passports. People are found in different countries, not countries of their origin. So I wouldn't say, because I don't know how got into the country, but I will rest assured, I think it also concerns me, especially with the visa on arrival thing. It's an online application. And because something is online, it's not too interactive, it's not too psychological. Like if I sit in front of you, I'm interviewing you for a visa process, by your mannerism, I will tell that you don't deserve or you deserve the visa, like they do in the embassy of the United States and all the other embassies in the world. And I think these are some of the challenges that come with the internet of doing things, you know, that it takes away the human ability of discerning abnormality in persons. So I would say these are some of the challenges, but I think we all learn from this, and we have to take these lessons learned and implement them in protecting our borders, you know, and also protecting the people of our country and the image of our country.
We have very porous entry points in Sierra Leone. It's not a country where it's just at the airport. We have border crossing points that are poorly manned. We also have, we've had a situation when there was a Nigerian who was wanted in Nigeria, I think, for a murder. And they found him at a nightclub in Sierra Leone.
You wouldn't know.
So with all these problems we have seen, what could be a solution for Sierra Leone going forward? What do we need to do to adjust and perhaps advance and improve like some other countries have done, in terms of whether it's somebody who does not require a visa to get to Sierra Leone or someone that requires a visa, but properly manning to make sure that the right people get to Sierra Leone?
You made mention of the Nigerian. A Nigerian can actually travel to Sierra Leone on just an identity card, an ECOWAS identity card. So if someone is tried by a Nigerian court for murder and they find their way into Sierra Leone using a valid document until it breaks out that this man is a convict, is a felon, we will not know. But it is our responsibility as a state to respond when those demands of extradition are made, where there are established relations, treaties of extradition. So we will make every effort, but these things happen. Even in the United States, somebody can flee from one country and go to the United States, whereas they are wanted for crimes in that country. It's possible.
Yeah, but every time you encounter a problem, you come up with solutions to address that problem.
That's correct.
That's also part of development.
That's correct.
We learn as we go. That's how
correct.
we grow.
That's correct.
So with the lessons learned recently, what can we do going forward to ensure that we do not repeat some of these mistakes?
Now, we have to strengthen our port of entry to ensure that they are not compromised. Immigration officers must really wake up to the task. They must be vigilant. They must not compromise. They have to go through our embassies, the issuance of visa. They should do deeper due diligence to ensure that these people that are coming are of no criminal records in their country of origin. We also must ensure that we keep the integrity of our passport, and we speak to our folks out there not to overstay and misuse the consular privileges that are given to our citizens that are going to these countries. When we all do this, we protect the image of our country, and we get ourselves from this suspension zone that is inglorious, that is not pleasant for me, that is a stain on the very many good things that we're doing in international stage.
So, Minister, we're rounding off. What assurances would you give to the general public? I mean, the football enthusiasts who would want to watch the World Cup. There are students who would wish to study in the US. What assurances would you give to them?
We will continue to work with the embassy and with the State Department to ensure that we find a way to remedy those aspects that can be remedied by the government.
Okay.
The overstaying rates can be actually taken care of by the U.S. Embassy's consular section, because they must also do proper due diligence to know the character of those they issue these visas to. The righteous ones are suffering because of the conduct and act of the wicked ones. So let's all talk to our folks. Don't misuse these privileges. Let's be a compliant country, so that we don't fall in these inglorious categorizations.
When you said the kinds of people they give these visas to, the ambassador was talking just now about, trying to merge people's vital data into their website.
Progress. Progress.
Criminal records and all these things.
That's correct.
That you get to know who you're giving these visas.
That's correct. And I think learning from this, we will all tighten our spaces, ensure that we innovate to prevent fraudsters taking advantage of porous systems.
Right.
Thank you very much for making time to be part of the program this morning. We would obviously, these are conversations that continue, especially with the US situation now. But thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. for your time.
He is Timothy Musakaba, and he is the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Well, this is where we'll have to end today's edition of Wake Up Sierra Leone. We say thanks to all our guests for being a part of the program. Thanks to your lovely audience for tuning in and for also making contributions to the conversation.